Now, financiers say that capitalism will adjust itself better if it's left alone, and that in any case all will be back to normal in a year or two. Could you address that?
Well, if that's the case, what situation do we have now? It's been left alone, allegedly, for something like 20 years under neoliberal capitalism, under the Thatcher-Reagan paradigm, so-called, and it's ended in a mess. And what's more to the point, we predicted it would end in a mess. Now, when they say, well, left to itself, capitalism would stabilise, there's a certain truth in that, in the sense that capitalism will never automatically disappear from the scene of history, but it will stabilise on the basis of millions of people unemployed, of the poor getting poorer, of the rich getting richer, and of people in this world, in the neo-colonial world, reduced to an even worse starvation rate than is the case at the present time. The whole purpose of the capitalists in this crisis is, first of all, number one, to save their system as far as possible, which they're in the process of doing with the collaboration of the ex-leaders of the workers' parties like Brown, like Blair and so on, and also with the Democrats in the US, to save their system. Number two, to introduce a form of control different to what we've seen, that would avoid some of the dangers that they faced at the present time, but capitalism will go on. This is a different means of controlling their system. And number three, and most important, making sure that working people pay the price for this crisis. So yes, they will have a certain stability, but the cost will be paid for us and paid by the next generation and the generation after them. So that's why we say, in this hour of crisis of capitalism, when some of the backwoodsmen in the American Congress are talking about this being socialism, the fact that the American government have stepped in, it's not socialism, but the very fact that they've raised what they think is the scarecrow of socialism, it will be implanted into the ideas of many working class people. Well, why has this system failed? The capitalists can't give an answer to that. We can, because it's the contradictions of capitalism. And the second point will be, how do we get ourselves out of this crisis? And there's two ways. One is along the road to capitalism, and I repeat, the working class will pay the price for that. The other is a serious struggle now for socialism, to defend all the past gains and to make sure that the capitalists pay the price, the cost for this crisis. The first step is to open the books to inspection by the labour and trade union movement. The nationalisation of the banks and the insurance companies is a step towards a democratic socialist plan of production, of a state monopoly of trade that prevents capital moving in and out of the country, which is determining the fate of individual nations and individual governments. On the basis of such measures, we can then come together on a European and a world scale for the working class to collaborate for a new society.
Okay, do you think that this crisis will raise these demands in the minds of workers? Will it have a stunning effect, or will it lead to mass struggles? This is what's required, but will it actually...
Nobody can say exactly what is going to take place in the next period, but we can have, if you like, a general stab at seeing what the developments are likely to be. Number one, the fact that unregulated capitalism, the free market that we were told by Francis Fukuyama and others, this was the most perfect society that was humanly possible, they said. This is the end of history. They said you couldn't have a better system than liberal capitalist democracy based upon the free market. That idea has been shattered. It's been reduced to dust as a result of these developments. That's number one. Number two, and therefore it raises in the minds of workers, well, the state is acting on behalf of big business now. What if I begin to lose my job, or lose my home, or my children can't be educated and I don't have a house to live in? Then the state must step in to try and solve my problems. Already in the US, as the cost of this $700 billion bailout, the Democrats have at least put pressure to say that certain measures should be taken. I think that's not worth the paper that it's written on, but it shows that in the minds of workers, this crisis is the responsibility of Wall Street, Fraud Street, and Main Street. In other words, ordinary working class people will pay for this. And therefore, out of this crisis a change in outlook, in political outlook, in what Marxists call consciousness, on the part of working people, of a layer that will begin to develop. Another layer, perhaps, terrified that the consequences will try and hide their heads, may even be in denial, like the capitalists were in denial about their system. They wouldn't be able to afford to do that because they'd be forced to wake up by the impact that this crisis will have. In other words, we'll have a fundamental change, not immediately, it's already taking place, but looking towards the next months and the next years, a much more favourable terrain, political terrain, within which to argue the ideas of socialism, of solidarity, of fighting back against the bosses, all the ideas that were supposed to have been buried by history, particularly after the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Socialism was off the agenda. Socialism is going to come roaring back as a result of these developments as a viable alternative for working class people.
Thank you, Peter. In the 1 minute or two I've got left, and I just ask you, the Adam Smith Institute says we need more millionaires and billionaires because they call themselves the wealth creators. And I'd very much like to get your response to that comment.
Well, as a well-known figure said in British history, they would say that, wouldn't they? They are the representatives of the millionaires and the billionaires. As to the billionaires being the wealth creators, what evidence is there now? They are responsible for the destruction of wealth. They're responsible for perhaps over $1 trillion destruction in wealth in the US alone. Apart from Northern Rock, Bradford and Bingley, UBS and the rest of them, they are actually destroying wealth now. Capitalism is a system, through boom and bust, that goes through a period of upswing, and in that upswing, or in a period of stagnation, or a period of crisis, the real wealth creators are not the billionaires, they're parasites. The real wealth creators are the working class. It's the labour of the working class that is the goose that lays the golden egg for capitalism. And the working class is the main agent, if you like, of the development of wealth throughout history. In this crisis, they'll be thrown out of the factories. They're already being thrown out of the factories in Britain. And therefore, wealth is being destroyed by those people who allegedly are the so-called wealth creators, or even the theoreticians of wealth creators.
Thank you very much, Peter Taaffe.